So getting back to the series of conflicts, you have at the beginning of this section, the conflict with Esau begins at the very birth of Esau and Jacob, and the foreshadowing of conflict to come as Jacob sort of grabs onto Esau's heel, and the fact that Rachel reports that the children struggled together within her. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, the elder shall serve the younger. There's also a conflict that is kind of the responsibility of the parents, because Isaac loves Esau, but Rebekah loves Jacob. So you can imagine the family situation that is set up here. And if you are ever tempted to think of the Old Testament as somewhat irrelevant, all you have to do is look at the relationships and family dynamics in Genesis, and you will find that it's really, really pertinent. Another conflict comes as Esau sells his birthright. Now, the birthright basically goes or should go to the firstborn, and the one who has the birthright is basically the guarantor of the future, the family line, and receives a double portion. And so this is basically the whole future of the family, and Esau gives it away. He doesn't really care. He sort of gives in to his immediate needs and thereby loses it. Now, it's really interesting that in Deuteronomy 21:17, there is a command that the birthright can't be given away, even if the father dislikes the firstborn son. The firstborn son has to be given the birthright. It's interesting. And another passage in Deuteronomy forgives the transfer of birthright to another. You have here in Esau and Jacob kind of a hunter versus shepherd rivalry. Jacob is the sort of civilized one. What that means, we don't know. In this account of the giving away of the birthright, there is a sort of play on words with Bekorah, birthright, and Barakah, blessing. And this is sort of a foretelling of what's going to happen next. Because in chapter 27, Jacob steals the blessing. The blessing is sort of the last will and testament, and it signals political dominance, and it cannot be taken back. The blessing here by Isaac is, may God give you the dew of the heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. Esau's response is to call upon that meaning of Jacob's name, that sort of folk meaning of Jacob's name that we saw before. He supplants. So he has supplanted Esau 2 times in taking away the birthright and taking away the blessing. And the only thing his father at this point can give him is, see, away from the fatness of the earth shall your home be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you break loose, you shall break his yoke from your neck. Because of Jacob's conflict with Esau, he is forced to go into exile. But also, the other consideration is that Esau has married one of the daughters of Canaan, and Rebekah is determined that Jacob will marry one of her relatives, sort of marry within the tribe. And so Jacob leaves. And he comes to a certain place, and as he lays down to sleep, he saw a ladder set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And here the Lord gives Jacob a blessing. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you. So here we have a repetition of the promise. Offspring, land, being a blessing to the nations, and also God's presence. And it is said that Jacob creates a pillar, meaning a kind of altar, and he calls the place Bethel, meaning the house of God. Beit in Hebrew is house, El is a word for God. And Jacob makes a vow to God and promises a tithe. It is interesting to note that the promise is given to Jacob on his way into exile. The promises of God are not always fulfilled directly or in a direct line. Sometimes many different kinds of events need to take place before the promise is fulfilled. This house of God, Bethel, as Jacob names it, later becomes an illegitimate sanctuary in the prophets of Hosea and Amos. But originally it seems to have been a legitimate place of worship because Abraham had already built altars near Bethel. The dream imagery is possibly seeing the ladder like something like a ziggurat of Babylon, more like ramps, a staircase, perhaps. However, it is not seen here as a channel of communication with God. In other words, pagan associations are rejected. The emphasis is on the divine name Yahweh. The stone, the altar, is a place where God appears, but his dwelling is in heaven. Now, once Jacob reaches Rebekah's family, he meets with Laban. and there are a series of conflicts with Laban. One commentator that I read suggests that Laban is a rather mercenary person. We see this in the negotiations regarding Rebekah becoming the wife of Isaac. And it is possible, according to Alistair Roberts, that Jacob comes as a family member to Laban, but Laban, sort of recalling the earlier visit of Abraham's servant when he comes to see if Rebekah will become Isaac's wife, is sort of expecting a train of goods, of gold, of flocks, of some show of wealth. Not seeing that, he then relegates Jacob to the status of servant or even slave, or perhaps indentured servant, we might say. So he sort of demotes him from family to servant. And Jacob agrees to serve 7 years for Rachel. Others have suggested that Jacob is possibly adopted because he is later seen in competition with Laban's sons, but he is certainly treated like a servant. As you probably know the story, Jacob is deceived and is given Leah for a wife and must serve another 7 years for Rachel. And ironically, the opposite from Jacob or Esau, the rationale for this is that the younger should not supplant the older. So this is a huge irony because Jacob has supplanted Esau regarding the birthright and the blessing. And now the tables are turned on him. It is interesting to know that later priestly law forbade marrying two sisters living at the same time. We will see probably why. There is then a conflict involving Leah and Rachel. And this is the result both of duplicity by the father and the favoritism of Jacob. So Laban has set up the situation so that the two sisters are rivals, but Jacob has his part. He does not, he makes it very, very clear that he does not love Leah. And he's not at all a gentleman about it. He just openly prefers Rachel. And we will see that this is going to continue to cause problems all the way along. In chapters 29:31 to 30:24, you have accounts of the birth of children sort of in competition. And also you have the recurring theme of sterility, as we had with Sarah, as we had with Rebekah, and that situation is finally resolved with the birth of Joseph, because Rachel, and up until this time, has had no children, while Leah has had many, and while two servant girls have also had children, and finally Rachel. The children in the text represent both individuals and tribes. That's something to keep in mind. So we have this section starting out, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So God is trying to sort of rebalance what is going on, to sort of compensate Leah for the fact that she is unloved.